Now that we've done the data analysis, and I want to refer us back to the GPS. Remember, in order to know where we're wanting to go, putting in good data is really essential. So we've gathered our data, we've done the data analysis, we know what the current strengths are, and we know where the gap is. Now we need to think about what does it look like on the IEP itself, on the form. And there are some specific regulatory requirements. So let's take again a look at those regulations. The statements need to include both academic and functional performance, and it needs to clearly have a statement of how the disability affects performance in the general curriculum. For academic performance, then, we need to look at things like the student's response to learning strategies, accommodations, interventions, standards, or classroom instruction. We want to ask, what have we learned about the student's academic skills and knowledge? That's the data that you want to put into your PLAT statement. So here's an example. Corey reads 24 words per minute, while the benchmark for second graders in the regular curriculum is 60 to 80 words per minute. So I can show what Corey's current level is compared to the expectation in the general curriculum. Corey can say 5 out of 10 short and long vowel sounds. He cannot read multiple multisyllabic words. Again, academic performance. I want to do the same thing for the functional performance. I want to look again at the social emotional behavior performance, their communication skills, performance in the areas of leisure, recreation, self-management, independent living skills, etc. So I want to ask, what have we learned about the student's ability to function independently or appropriately with peers and adults, the same kind of behavior we would expect of his age. And I want to use functional performance to describe. In a classroom observation, Corey sat quietly in his seat for 10 minutes. At the 10-minute mark, he began to look around the room, followed by twirling his pencil and playing with his paper. When placed with a partner to complete his work, he was able to remain on task and complete the assignment. Gives information about his functional performance in the classroom. Then I want to get to this concept of how does the disability affect performance? And so we want to consider how it affects progress in learning those grade level content standards. What gets in the way? A word of caution. When describing how the disability affects progress, we do not want to use the student's exceptionality as the reason for not making progress. So, for example, something not to write. Marcus's learning disability affects his progress in the general curriculum. That doesn't tell me much because learning disability is a very generalized term. Another way to say it would be Marcus's weakness in applying strategies such as making inferences and making complex predictions affect his progress in comprehending sixth grade literary materials. In this instance, I'm actually explaining what the learning disability is. I'm describing it instead of simply using a generic term like learning disability, which can mean many, many different things. So this is another place to stop now. There are two examples that were included as part of your handouts, one for Johnny and one for Katie. I'd encourage you to stop and read through those two examples, and when you're finished, we'll come back and we'll wrap up this section on present levels of performance. Welcome back. Thank you for taking the time to read about Katie and Johnny, and I hope you found those to be informative. Maybe they're exactly the way you've been doing your IEPs all along, but I hope you learned something a little bit unique or new by reading those two examples. To close out this segment, I'm going to give you another little bit of a practice. First of all, on the slide, you'll see a statement about Rosie. And it says, Rosie has trouble controlling her behavior. She gets easily upset when interacting with peers and does not take direction from authority. Once off task, it's really hard to re-engage her. Stop your video, take a minute and say, how would you improve that statement? And when you have improved it, come back and I'll show you one of the ways in which I would suggest improving it. So here is how you might improve it. Rosie's teacher reports that Rosie is often off task and interacts inappropriately with her peers. Observations of Rosie indicated that when interacting with peers, Rosie became upset. She cried, she threw materials, she left the group. 50% of the time within the first 5 minutes of a group activity. Once off task, it took up to 20 minutes for her to re-engage in the activity. Now that is one way. It doesn't mean it is the only way, but it is more descriptive and gives more information than the first way. Here's another one. Try this one. Can you improve this statement? Rosie has improved in math since last year. She can add and subtract and identify most money. She has limited budgeting experience. She can estimate two-digit numbers, but not more than that. Again, we have some concrete information, but not a whole lot. So how would you improve? Stop the video for a minute, improve the statement, and when you're ready and you've made your improvement, come back and see how I improved it. Okay, now that you had a chance to improve Rosie's present level statement in math, here's another way you might do that. Rosie met her previous IEP goals. Rosie can add and subtract single-digit numbers with 90% accuracy. Rosie can add double-digit numbers with 50% accuracy and is unable to subtract double-digit numbers that require regrouping. She can identify coins and small bills, penny, nickel, dime, quarter, $1 and $5 bills, but she cannot make change. Rosie can estimate two-digit numbers, but not more than that. The fourth grade benchmark for math requires the following computation. Add, subtract, multiply, three-digit by two-digit factors, and divide two-digit dividends by one-digit divisors in order to solve problems. Now, I know that that probably is a lot more of a statement than what you might be used to on your IEPs, but it clearly gives us more information, and it clearly connects back to the expectations, to those standards for Rosie's grade level. That brings us to the end of Module 2. But before you view Module 3, I'd like you to do two things. First, I'd like you to take the IEP worksheet that we provided as part of this module, and I'd like you to think of any student. It can be a real student or it can be a student that you make up as a case study. But use any student and make some notes. Think about, first of all, general education or general curriculum considerations or the standards considerations, and make some notes about what those are in relation to your student. Then create some present level statements that include both the academic and functional that describe what your student can do now in relation to those standards or the general curriculum expectations. Draw a conclusion in terms of what that implies as far as the instructional needs for the student, and then finally a statement about how the disability affects progress or involvement in the general education curriculum. When you've concluded that, then I'd like you to take your own IEPs and review your present level statements. Ask yourself, are your statements in your IEPs related to the instructional results you want to achieve for this student or the vision for this student? Do your present level statements reflect what the student knows in relation to the general education curriculum or the standards? In other words, can you see some reference to the standards in your present level statements? Are they stated in measurable terms? Are they objective? And finally, do your IEP present level statements include strengths, identify the instructional need, and describe how the disability affects progress in the general education curriculum?
Thank you, Carol. I hope you found that information helpful. And now, feel free to stay with us for the next segment.